They say revenge is a dish best served cold. What they don't tell you is how satisfying it feels when your former best friend is on her knees, literally begging for your forgiveness, while everything she built her life on crumbles around her. The tears streaming down her face, the desperation in her voice as she pleaded with me to, "Please, just listen." It was everything I'd dreamed of for 3 long years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, when I still believed in friendship, loyalty, and the naive idea that some people actually deserved your trust. Sarah Matthews had been my best friend since we were 7 years old. We met on the first day of 2nd grade when she defended me against Tommy Rodriguez, who'd been pulling my pigtails during recess. She marched right up to him, all 4 feet of righteous fury, and told him if he touched me again, she'd tell his mom he'd been stealing cookies from other kids' lunchboxes. It worked. Tommy never bothered me again, and Sarah and I became inseparable. For 15 years, we shared everything. Every secret, every crush, every dream we had about our futures. We planned our weddings together when we were 12, complete with detailed sketches of our dresses and debates over whether we'd be each other's maid of honor or if we'd have a double wedding. We stayed up all night during sleepovers, whispering about boys and planning our escape from our small hometown of Millbrook. We were going to move to the city together, get an apartment, and take on the world as a team. Sarah was the sister I never had. When my parents divorced when I was 14, she was there every night, bringing me ice cream and letting me cry on her shoulder. When her dad lost his job the following year, I was there to help her family with groceries, using money from my part-time job at the local bookstore. We protected each other, supported each other, and genuinely believed that nothing could ever come between us. That's what made what happened next so devastating. I met David Chen during our sophomore year of college. Sarah and I had managed to get into the same university and shared a dorm room, just like we'd planned since we were kids. David was in my American literature class, and I'd been harboring a massive crush on him for weeks before I finally worked up the courage to talk to him. He was everything I found attractive in a guy. Intelligent, funny, with these warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through me in the best possible way. He had this habit of running his hand through his dark hair when he was concentrating, and I'd find myself staring at him during class, completely lost in daydreams about what it would be like to kiss him. When I finally told Sarah about my feelings for David, she was incredibly supportive. She encouraged me to ask him out, helped me pick out outfits when I knew I'd see him, and listened patiently as I analyzed every interaction we had. "He's totally into you, Emma," she'd say with that confident smile of hers. "I can tell by the way he looks at you. You should definitely go for it." It took me 3 more weeks to work up the courage, but I finally asked David if he wanted to study together for our upcoming midterm. To my amazement and delight, he said yes. We spent 4 hours in the library that afternoon, and by the end of it, we were holding hands under the table. He walked me back to my dorm, and when we reached my door, he kissed me goodnight. It was soft and perfect, and I felt like I was floating on air. Sarah was waiting up for me when I got back to our room, practically bouncing with excitement. "Tell me everything," she demanded, and I did. I told her about the way David's eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he made me laugh with his impression of our pretentious professor, and how the kiss had felt like something out of a movie. She squealed with delight and hugged me tight. "I'm so happy for you, Em. You deserve this." David and I started dating officially a week later. For the next 2 years, he was the center of my world. We had that kind of love that makes other people roll their eyes, constantly holding hands, leaving sweet notes for each other, talking until 3 in the morning about everything and nothing. Sarah was always supportive, always encouraging, always there to listen when I needed to talk about relationship stuff or when David and I had our occasional minor disagreements. She was also there when David and I went through our rough patch during senior year. The stress of graduation, job hunting, and figuring out our future was taking its toll on both of us. We'd been talking about moving in together after graduation, but David got a job offer in Seattle while I had opportunities in Boston. For weeks, we couldn't figure out how to make it work. I was devastated at the thought of losing him, and I spent countless nights crying to Sarah about how unfair it all was. "Long-distance relationships can work," she'd tell me, rubbing my back as I sobbed into my pillow. "You guys love each other. You'll figure it out. And if he really loves you, he'll find a way to make it work." Eventually, David and I decided to try long distance. It wasn't ideal, but we loved each other, and we were willing to make sacrifices. The plan was for me to take the job in Boston for a year while he established himself in Seattle, and then I'd look for opportunities there so we could be together. It seemed doable. Difficult but doable. What I didn't know was that while I was pouring my heart out to Sarah about my fears and hopes and dreams of a future with David, she was already making plans of her own. The night before graduation, Sarah and I had what I thought was one of our typical heart-to-heart conversations. We were sitting on the roof of our dorm building, a tradition we'd started freshman year whenever one of us needed to talk about something important. The campus was quiet below us, and the stars were unusually visible for a clear May evening. "I'm going to miss this so much," I said, gesturing at the campus spread out below us. "I'm going to miss us being together all the time." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and when I looked at her, she seemed unusually serious. "Emma, can I tell you something?" "Of course. You can tell me anything." She took a deep breath. "I'm scared about what happens after graduation. I mean, I know we'll stay friends, but everything's going to change. You'll have David and your new job and your new life. I'm scared I'll lose you." I felt a wave of affection for my best friend. Even after all these years, she still needed reassurance that our friendship was unbreakable. "Sarah, you're never going to lose me. You're my best friend. That's never going to change, no matter what. David knows how important you are to me. We're stuck with each other forever, remember?" She smiled then, but it seemed forced. "Promise me something?" "Anything. Promise me you'll always tell me if you need me. If things get hard with the long-distance thing, or if you're struggling, or if you just need someone to talk to, I want to be there for you." "I promise," I said, meaning it completely. "And you have to promise me the same thing. We're going to support each other through all of this, okay?" "Okay," she said, and this time her smile seemed genuine. I thought that conversation meant she was worried about growing apart as we entered the real world. I thought she was being a thoughtful friend, making sure I knew I could count on her during what would undoubtedly be a challenging transition period. I had no idea she was already planning to betray me in the worst possible way. Graduation came and went in a blur of ceremonies, parties, and tearful goodbyes. David left for Seattle 3 days later, and I started my job at a marketing firm in Boston the following Monday. The first few months of long distance were harder than either of us had anticipated. We tried to talk every day, but between the time difference and our demanding new jobs, it became increasingly difficult. Some days we'd only manage a quick text exchange. Other days we'd have long phone calls that left me feeling more lonely than before, because talking to him reminded me how much I missed having him there in person. Sarah, meanwhile, had gotten a job at a nonprofit in Seattle. "What are the odds?" she'd said when she told me about the opportunity. "I'll be able to keep an eye on David for you." At the time, I thought it was incredibly sweet that she was moving to the same city as my boyfriend. I thought she was doing it partially to help me feel better about the situation. Looking back, I can see how naive I was. For the first few months, Sarah was the perfect long-distance best friend. She'd send me pictures of her and David hanging out, usually in group settings with other people from their respective workplaces. She'd give me updates on how he was doing, reassure me when I was feeling insecure about the distance, and listen patiently when I worried that we were growing apart. "He talks about you all the time," she'd tell me during our weekly FaceTime calls. "Last night when we grabbed dinner, he spent like 20 minutes showing me pictures from your weekend in New York. He's crazy about you, Em. Don't worry so much." Those reassurances meant everything to me. I trusted Sarah's perspective completely, and having her there as my eyes and ears in Seattle made the distance feel more manageable. When David seemed distracted during our calls or took longer than usual to respond to my texts, Sarah would explain it away. "He's just stressed about the new project at work." Or, "He mentioned he's been having trouble sleeping in his new apartment." She always had a reasonable explanation that put my mind at ease. The first crack in my perfect trust appeared 6 months into the long-distance arrangement. I'd been having a particularly difficult week at work. My boss was a nightmare. I was working late every night, and I was feeling homesick and lonely. David and I had barely talked all week because he was dealing with his own work crisis. I called Sarah on Thursday night, desperate for some emotional support. "I don't know if I can do this much longer," I confessed, sitting on the floor of my tiny Boston apartment with tears streaming down my face. "I feel like David and I are becoming strangers. We barely talk anymore, and when we do, it feels forced. What if we're kidding ourselves? What if long distance is just too hard?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Emma, do you really love him?" "Of course I love him. Why would you ask that?" I think sometimes people stay in relationships because they're comfortable, not because they're actually happy. You've been with David for over 2 years. Maybe you're both just going through the motions." I was taken aback by her response. Usually, Sarah was encouraging and optimistic about my relationship. This new perspective felt jarring and unfamiliar. "I'm not going through the motions. I love him. I'm just struggling with the distance." Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. I just want you to be happy and you don't sound happy." Something about the conversation felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Sarah's tone seemed different somehow, less sympathetic and more leading. But I was emotional and exhausted, so I attributed my unease to my general state of mind rather than anything Sarah had actually said. The second crack appeared a month later. David had been planning to visit me for our 2-year anniversary, but at the last minute he had to cancel because of a work emergency. I was devastated. I'd been looking forward to seeing him for weeks, and the cancellation felt like a sign that work would always take priority over our relationship. When I called Sarah to vent about the situation, she seemed less surprised than I expected. "Wait, you knew about the work emergency?" I asked. "Well, he mentioned he might have to deal with some client issues this weekend, but I didn't know it would interfere with your plans." "When did he mention that?" Another pause. "We grabbed lunch yesterday. He seemed really stressed about it." "You had lunch with David yesterday?" "Yeah, just as friends. We do that sometimes." "Is that weird?" It wasn't weird exactly. Sarah and David had become friends during our college years, and it made sense that they'd hang out occasionally since they were both in Seattle. But something about the way she mentioned it so casually, almost as an afterthought, bothered me. And the fact that David hadn't mentioned having lunch with Sarah when we talked the night before seemed strange. "Did he say anything else about the work situation?" I asked. "Not really. He just seemed overwhelmed. I told him he should try to find a way to make it work so he could still visit you, but he said it was impossible." That conversation left me feeling even more unsettled. Why hadn't David mentioned having lunch with Sarah? And why did Sarah seem to know more about David's work situation than I did? I tried to shake off my paranoia, telling myself I was being irrational and jealous. Sarah was my best friend. David was my boyfriend. They were both people I trusted completely. There was no reason to feel suspicious about them spending time together, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few months, I started paying closer attention to the details of Sarah's stories about her interactions with David. Little inconsistencies began to emerge. She'd mentioned conversations with him that he never brought up with me. She'd know things about his daily routine that seemed oddly specific for casual friendship. When I'd ask David about spending time with Sarah, he'd acknowledge it but keep his descriptions vague and brief. The breaking point came in December, 8 months after David and I had started long distance. I'd been planning to surprise him for Christmas by flying to Seattle without telling him. Sarah had helped me coordinate the surprise, offering to pick me up from the airport and even suggesting that I hide in her apartment until David got home from work so I could surprise him at his place. I was so excited about the plan. It felt romantic and spontaneous, and I was desperate to see David after months of missing him. The night before my flight, I called him for our usual check-in, barely able to contain my excitement about the surprise. "What are you up to this weekend?" I asked, fishing for information about his schedule. "Nothing special. Probably just relaxing at home. Maybe I'll hang out with some people from work on Saturday night." "That sounds nice. You deserve a break." "Yeah. I wish you could be here, though. I miss you." "I miss you too," I said, my heart swelling with anticipation for the surprise. Everything seemed perfect. David would be home, unsuspecting, and I'd show up at his door with the Christmas gift I'd been carefully selecting for weeks. It was going to be magical. I landed in Seattle at 2 p.m. on Saturday. Sarah picked me up from the airport as planned, and we went back to her apartment so I could freshen up and gather my courage for the surprise. The plan was to wait until around 6 p.m., when David would definitely be home from any weekend errands, and then I'd go to his apartment and knock on his door. At 5:30, I was pacing around Sarah's living room, checking my appearance in the mirror and rehearsing what I'd say when David opened the door. Sarah was being unusually quiet, and when I looked at her, she seemed nervous. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." "Are you sure David will be home? He said he might hang out with work people tonight." Sarah's face went pale. "He what?" "He said he might hang out with people from work tonight." "Why?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I watched her face cycle through several emotions I couldn't quite identify. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Emma, I need to tell you something." The tone of her voice made my stomach drop. "What?" "David. David isn't hanging out with people from work tonight." What do you mean? She looked like she might be sick. He's here. He's been here since last night. I stared at her, not understanding. Here? In your apartment? She nodded miserably. I don't understand. Why is David at your apartment? Is he helping you with something? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Emma, I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. We tried to stop, we really did, but we fell in love. The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. What are you saying? David and we've been together for 3 months. I'm so sorry, Emma. I know how this looks, and I know you're going to hate me, but I love him, and he loves me. The room seemed to spin around me. I grabbed the back of Sarah's couch to steady myself, trying to process what I was hearing. You're sleeping with my boyfriend? Ex-boyfriend, she said quietly. He broke up with you 2 weeks ago. He was going to tell you, but he was trying to find the right way. He what? I interrupted. David didn't break up with me. We talked last night. We talk every day. Sarah looked confused. That can't be right. He told me he ended things with you after Thanksgiving. My mind was reeling. David and I had talked the night before. We'd said, I love you, before hanging up. He'd told me he missed me. What was Sarah talking about? Emma, I think you should sit down, Sarah said gently. Don't. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Don't you dare act like you're concerned about me right now. Where is he? He's in my bedroom. He's sleeping. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My best friend and my boyfriend, in her bedroom, together. While I'd been planning a romantic surprise, I couldn't even finish the thought. How long? I asked. I told you. 3 months. No. How long have you wanted this? How long have you been planning to steal him from me? I wasn't planning anything. It just happened. We were spending time together and we started talking about our feelings and... Our feelings? You were talking about our feelings? You mean the feelings I told you about in confidence? The feelings I shared with you because I trusted you? Sarah was crying now. Emma, please. I know you're hurt, but you have to understand. I don't have to understand anything. I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded because inside I felt like I was dying. I want to talk to David. Maybe you should wait until you've had time to process. Get him. Now. Sarah hesitated, then walked toward her bedroom. I heard muffled voices, and a few minutes later, David emerged, wearing rumpled clothes and looking like he'd just woken up. When he saw me, his face went white. Emma, what are you doing here? Surprise, I said, and my voice only shook a little. We stared at each other for a long moment. This was the man I'd been planning to spend my life with. The man I'd been missing desperately for 8 months. The man I'd flown across the country to surprise for Christmas. And he was looking at me like I was a stranger who'd broken into his girlfriend's apartment. I can explain, he said finally. Can you? Because Sarah seems to think you broke up with me 2 weeks ago, but somehow I missed that conversation. David's jaw tightened. I was going to tell you. I was trying to figure out how, by continuing to tell me you love me every night on the phone? I do love you. I'll always love you. But I'm in love with Sarah now. The distinction felt like a knife twisting in my chest. How long? Emma, how long have you been fucking my best friend? David flinched. Don't make this ugly. Don't make this ugly? I laughed, and the sound was harsh and unfamiliar. You've been cheating on me with my best friend for months, lying to me every single day, and you don't want me to make it ugly? It wasn't supposed to happen this way, Sarah said from behind David. We tried to fight it. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. The girl who'd defended me from bullies in 2nd grade, who'd held my hair back when I was sick, who'd cried with me when my parents divorced. That person was gone. In her place was someone who'd systematically betrayed me while pretending to comfort me. You helped me plan this surprise, I said to her. You knew I was coming here to surprise him and you let me do it. You could have told me the truth at any point in the last 3 months, but instead you watched me make a fool of myself. I wanted to tell you, Sarah said. But David thought, don't blame this on me, David interrupted. We both agreed it was better to wait. Wait for what? I asked. Wait until I showed up here and found you in bed together? Wait until I'd humiliated myself completely? Neither of them had an answer for that. I stood there in Sarah's living room, surrounded by reminders of our friendship, photos of us from college, the matching necklaces we'd bought during our senior trip, the books she'd borrowed from me and never returned, and felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, though that was certainly shattered. Something deeper. My faith in people. My ability to trust. My belief that the people closest to me actually cared about my well-being. I need to go, I said finally. Emma, wait. Sarah started toward me. "Can we please talk about this? I know you're hurt, but don't." I held up my hand to stop her. "Just don't. Don't pretend you care about my feelings now. I do care about your feelings. You're my best friend." "No, I'm not. Best friends don't do this to each other. I don't know what you are, but you're not my friend." I turned toward the door and David called after me. "Emma, I'm sorry. I really am. I never wanted to hurt you." I stopped and turned back to look at him. "But you did hurt me. Every single day for 3 months you looked me in the eye, or as close as you can get on FaceTime, and lied to me. You told me you loved me while you were fucking her. You let me worry about our relationship, let me blame myself for the distance between us, let me think I was going crazy when I sensed something was wrong. You both did that to me." "We didn't mean," Sarah started. "Yes, you did. You meant every bit of it, because it was easier than being honest. It was easier than dealing with the consequences of what you were doing. So you let me live in a fantasy while you built your new life together." I walked to the door and stopped with my hand on the handle. "I hope you're happy together. I really do. Because what you did to get each other was so awful that you'd better make damn sure it was worth it." I left Sarah's apartment and walked directly to the hotel near the airport where I'd booked a room for the night. I changed my flight to the earliest available departure and spent the next 6 hours sitting on the bathroom floor, crying harder than I'd ever cried in my life. The betrayal was devastating enough on its own, but what made it truly unbearable was the calculated nature of it. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake that had spiraled out of control. This was 3 months of deliberate deception. 3 months of Sarah listening to me worry about my relationship while she was sleeping with my boyfriend. 3 months of David telling me he loved me while he was falling in love with someone else. 3 months of both of them watching me suffer and doing nothing to ease that suffering. They had stolen 3 months of my life. 3 months I could have spent healing, moving on, figuring out who I was without David. Instead, I'd spent those months pouring emotional energy into a relationship that had already ended, confiding in a best friend who was actively betraying me, and blaming myself for problems that weren't even real. The flight back to Boston was a blur of tears and sleeping pills. When I finally made it back to my apartment, I felt like a completely different person than the one who'd left 2 days earlier. That Emma had been naive and trusting and full of hope for the future. This Emma felt hollow and angry and completely alone in the world. Over the next few days, both Sarah and David tried to contact me repeatedly. Phone calls, texts, emails, they were relentless in their attempts to explain and apologize. I read the first few messages, which were full of justifications about how they'd tried to fight their feelings and how sorry they were that I'd been hurt. Then I blocked both of their numbers and email addresses. I had no interest in their explanations or their guilt. The worst part of the whole situation was how isolated it left me. Sarah had been my closest friend, the person I told everything to. Losing her meant losing not just a friendship, but my entire support system. And because she and David had been part of the same friend group in college, I found myself cut off from several other people as well. Mutual friends who were uncomfortable taking sides, or who bought into Sarah and David's narrative that they'd fallen in love and couldn't help it. I spent the holidays alone in my Boston apartment, working extra hours and trying to figure out how to rebuild my life. The anger came and went in waves. Some days I felt nothing but sadness and loss. Other days I was so furious I couldn't concentrate on anything else. I'd find myself imagining confrontations where I said all the things I wished I'd said in Sarah's apartment. I'd picture scenarios where they got their comeuppance, where their perfect new relationship fell apart, where they realized what they'd given up by betraying me. But as the weeks turned into months, I realized that anger without action was just poison. It was eating away at me without affecting them at all. They were probably living their happy life in Seattle, posting cute couple photos on social media, and never thinking about the damage they'd done to me. The injustice of it was overwhelming. That's when I started planning. I didn't consciously decide to seek revenge at first. It began as idle curiosity about what Sarah and David were up to. I created fake social media accounts to keep tabs on them, telling myself I needed to know how they were doing for my own peace of mind. What I found made my blood boil. They were disgustingly happy. Photos of weekend trips, cozy dinners, hiking adventures. David had never been much of a hiker when we were together, but apparently Sarah had inspired him to try new things. They looked radiant in every picture, like people who'd found their soulmates. The captions were full of inside jokes and heart emojis and references to their incredible journey together. There was no acknowledgement anywhere of how their relationship had begun. No hint of guilt or remorse. No mention of me at all. It was as if I'd never existed, as if our friendship and relationship had been completely erased from their history. That's when the idle curiosity turned into something more focused. I started digging deeper into their lives, learning about their jobs, their routines, their friends. Social media made it surprisingly easy to piece together the details of their existence. Sarah had gotten a promotion at her nonprofit and was working on some big fundraising campaign. David had switched companies and was apparently doing very well for himself at a tech startup. They'd moved in together 6 months after my discovery, which meant they'd been planning their life together while I was still being lied to. They'd adopted a dog, a golden retriever they'd named Sunshine because of course they had. They were talking about buying a house. Sarah's Instagram was full of Pinterest boards about wedding planning. They were building the life I'd thought I was going to have with David. The life Sarah had helped me dream about during all those late-night conversations. They'd taken my future and made it theirs, and they seemed completely untroubled by how they'd acquired it. As I gathered information about their lives, a plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't fully developed at first, just a vague idea about exposing their true characters to the world. But the more I learned about them, the more detailed the plan became. Sarah's job was the key. She worked for a nonprofit focused on helping low-income families, and her public persona was all about integrity, compassion, and helping others. Her LinkedIn profile described her as passionate about making a difference in the lives of those less fortunate. She regularly posted about the importance of honesty and authenticity in both personal and professional relationships. The irony was so thick I could taste it. David's new job was at a startup that prided itself on its family values and ethical business practices. The company's website featured a whole section about how they only hired people who embodied their core values of honesty, loyalty, and integrity. David had been promoted to a senior position and was apparently being considered for a partnership track. They'd built their professional lives on foundations of moral superiority, while their personal lives were built on lies and betrayal. The disconnect was staggering, and it gave me an idea. What if everyone in their lives knew the truth about how their relationship began? What if their co-workers, their friends, their families, and their professional networks knew that these two pillars of integrity had conducted a months-long affair behind their supposed best friend's back? What if the carefully curated image they'd built for themselves came crashing down? I spent weeks researching their professional and social connections, mapping out their networks, and figuring out the most effective way to expose their hypocrisy. It wasn't enough to just tell a few people. I needed to tell the right people in the right way to ensure maximum impact. The planning phase became an obsession. I'd come home from work every day and spend hours researching, strategizing, and preparing. I created detailed timelines of their deception, saved screenshots of their social media posts, and even tracked down other people who'd been in our college friend group to gather more information about the timeline of their relationship. I discovered that several people had suspected something was going on between Sarah and David months before I found out. Some had even made comments about how close they seemed during group gatherings. But no one had bothered to tell me. They'd all just watched me be humiliated and kept their suspicions to themselves. The more I learned, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about Sarah and David anymore. This was about an entire group of people who'd stood by and watched me be betrayed without saying a word. People who'd protected the cheaters while leaving the victim in the dark. My plan grew more elaborate as I uncovered new information. I wasn't just going to expose Sarah and David's affair. I was going to expose the entire network of people who'd enabled it. Everyone who'd known or suspected something and said nothing would have their complicity revealed as well. For 3 months, I gathered evidence, built my case, and prepared for the execution of my plan. I documented everything meticulously, creating a timeline that would be impossible to refute or explain away. I identified key people in their professional and personal lives who needed to know the truth. I crafted messages that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. The work was therapeutic in a way. Every evening spent planning was an evening spent feeling like I had some control over the situation. For the first time since discovering their betrayal, I felt like I was doing something productive with my anger, instead of just letting it consume me. I also used the time to work on myself. I started therapy to process the trauma of the betrayal. I joined a gym and began taking kickboxing classes, which helped me burn off some of the rage that had been building up inside me. I focused on my career and got a promotion at work. I started dating again, though I was upfront with potential partners about my trust issues. By the time I was ready to execute my plan, I was a different person than the one who'd discovered the affair. I was stronger, more confident, and absolutely certain that Sarah and David deserved whatever consequences came their way. I'd given them over a year to come clean on their own, to face the consequences of their actions, or to at least show some genuine remorse for what they'd done. Instead, they doubled down on their happiness and continued to present themselves as good people who'd simply fallen in love. The night before I put my plan into action, I felt a strange sense of calm. I'd been working toward this moment for months, and I was finally ready. I reviewed my materials one last time, made sure all my accounts and messages were prepared, and went to bed early. Tomorrow, Sarah and David's carefully constructed world was going to come crashing down, and I was going to watch it happen from the front row. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about that conversation Sarah and I had on the roof before graduation, when she'd made me promise to tell her if I ever needed her. She'd gotten her wish in the worst possible way. I did need her, desperately, but not for support. I needed her to face the consequences of her choices. I needed her to understand what betrayal felt like. I needed her to learn that actions have consequences, even when you think you've gotten away with them. Tomorrow, Sarah was going to discover that some promises come with a price, and some debts take years to collect. But when they finally come due, the interest is astronomical. I woke up at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, exactly 18 months after discovering Sarah and David's betrayal. The date had been carefully chosen. Tuesday was when Sarah's nonprofit held their weekly staff meetings, and David's startup had their all-hands meetings on Tuesday afternoons. Maximum impact, maximum audience, perfect timing. I made myself coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, looking at the carefully organized folders I'd spent months preparing. Each folder was labeled with a specific target: Sarah's workplace, David's workplace, college friends, Sarah's family, David's family, professional networks. Inside each folder were customized messages, supporting evidence and contact lists. Everything was ready. I started with Sarah's workplace at exactly 9 a.m., knowing that her staff meeting would begin at 9:30. I'd researched everyone in her organization, from the executive director down to the newest interns. The message I sent to her boss, Margaret Hoffman, was simple and factual. Dear Ms. Hoffman, I'm writing to inform you about a situation involving Sarah Matthews that I believe conflicts with your organization's values of integrity and honesty. For 3 months, Ms. Matthews conducted an affair with my boyfriend while pretending to be my best friend and confidant. During this time, she regularly listened to me discuss my relationship concerns while actively betraying me with the same person I was worried about. She helped me plan a surprise visit to see my boyfriend, knowing I would discover them together. I've attached a timeline of events with supporting evidence. I believe you should be aware of how your development coordinator conducts her personal relationships, as it directly contradicts the values your organization claims to represent. Sincerely, Emma. The email included screenshots of text conversations where Sarah had encouraged me to work things out with David while she was sleeping with him, photos from their social media showing them together during the time period when she was supposedly just keeping an eye on him, for me, and a detailed timeline that would be impossible for her to explain away. I sent similar messages to her entire team, the board of directors, and major donors whose email addresses I'd found through careful research of the organization's fundraising materials. Each message was slightly customized based on the recipient's relationship to Sarah, but they all contained the same core evidence. At 9:15, I moved on to David's workplace. His company's emphasis on family values and ethical leadership made my message even more pointed. To whom it may concern, I'm writing to inform you about David Chen's character and conduct in his personal relationships. For 3 months, Mr. Chen conducted an affair with my best friend, while maintaining a relationship with me through daily phone calls, where he told me he loved me. He systematically lied to me about his whereabouts, his feelings, and his intentions, while building a new relationship behind my back. When I discovered the affair by accident, he informed me that he had broken up with me 2 weeks prior, despite having told me he loved me the night before. I believe this pattern of deception and emotional manipulation reflects poorly on someone being considered for senior leadership positions. I've attached supporting evidence and a detailed timeline. Sincerely, Emma. I sent this message to David's direct supervisor, the HR department, his potential business partners, and several key clients whose contact information I'd found through the company's website and David's own LinkedIn networking. By 10 a.m., I had moved on to our college friends. This group required a different approach, since many of them had probably suspected something was going on. My message to them was less formal but more damning. Hi everyone, I wanted you all to know the truth about how Sarah and David's relationship really began, since many of you have been celebrating their love story on social media. For 3 months, while I was struggling with long distance and confiding in Sarah about my relationship fears, she was sleeping with David behind my back. She helped me plan a surprise Christmas visit to see him, knowing I would find them together. They both lied to me every single day for months, with Sarah even going so far as to reassure me about David's feelings while she was betraying me with him. I know some of you suspected something was going on and chose not to tell me. I understand why you stayed out of it, but I wanted you to know the full truth about the people you're supporting and celebrating. Their relationship isn't a beautiful love story, it's built on months of systematic deception and betrayal. I've attached evidence for anyone who wants to see the timeline for themselves. This message went to our entire college friend group, their new friends in Seattle, and several people from our hometown who'd been following their relationship on social media. The family emails were the most carefully crafted. I'd spent weeks researching Sarah's and David's family members, learning about their values and relationships. Sarah's mother was deeply religious and had always preached about the importance of loyalty and honesty. David's parents had recently celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary and frequently posted about the importance of commitment and faithfulness. To Sarah's mother, I wrote, Mrs. Matthews, I hope you remember me. I'm Emma, Sarah's college roommate and best friend since childhood. I'm writing to let you know about something that happened that I think you should be aware of, given the values you raised Sarah with. For 3 months, Sarah conducted an affair with my boyfriend while pretending to support our relationship. She would listen to me cry about missing him while she was sleeping with him. When I discovered them together, she told me they had tried to fight it, but couldn't help falling in love. I know you raised her to be honest and loyal, and I thought you should know that she chose to betray someone who trusted her completely rather than be truthful about her feelings. I've attached evidence if you'd like to verify what I'm telling you. By noon, I had sent over 50 emails to carefully selected targets across Sarah's and David's personal and professional networks. I'd posted detailed accounts with evidence on several social media platforms, tagged mutual friends in posts that would be visible to their extended networks, and even sent messages to local Seattle news outlets that covered nonprofit scandals. Then I sat back and waited. The first response came at 12:47 p.m. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Emma, this is Sarah. I don't know what you're doing, but you need to stop. Please call me. I deleted the message without responding. She'd blocked my original number after I'd refused to engage with her attempts to explain the situation, but apparently she'd found a way to contact me. I blocked the new number immediately. The second response came from David 20 minutes later, from an email address I'd never seen. Emma, I just heard from several people that you're spreading lies about Sarah and me. I understand you're hurt, but destroying our lives isn't going to help you heal. Please stop this before you do permanent damage. Lies. He was calling them lies. After everything they'd done, after all the evidence I'd provided, he had the audacity to claim I was lying. I forwarded his email to his HR department with a note. As you can see, when confronted with evidence of his deception, Mr. Chen's first instinct is to claim the victim is lying rather than take responsibility for his actions. This is exactly the kind of character issue I was hoping to bring to your attention. Over the next few hours, my phone buzzed constantly with notifications, friend requests from people wanting to see the drama, messages from mutual acquaintances asking for more details, and several blocked calls that I assumed were from Sarah or David trying different numbers. At 3 p.m., I received a message that made my heart race with satisfaction. It was from Jennifer Walsh, one of Sarah's co-workers. Hi Emma, I received your email about Sarah. I wanted you to know that several of us have been uncomfortable with some of Sarah's behavior lately, and your message explains a lot. She's been taking credit for ideas that weren't hers and has been very manipulative in team meetings. What you've described fits a pattern we've been noticing. I thought you should know that your message was taken seriously. More responses trickled in throughout the afternoon. A former college friend wrote, Emma, I owe you an apology. I suspected something was going on between Sarah and David last spring, but I didn't want to get involved. I should have told you. I'm sorry you went through this alone. David's business partner sent a brief but telling response. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We take character very seriously in our organization. By evening, it was clear that my plan was working better than I'd hoped. Sarah's carefully cultivated professional image was crumbling as her coworkers realized that her personal conduct directly contradicted everything she claimed to stand for. David's potential partnership was in jeopardy as his company questioned whether someone capable of months of systematic deception could be trusted with business relationships and client confidentiality. But the real satisfaction came from watching their social media presence implode. By 6 p.m., Sarah had made all her accounts private. By 8 p.m., David had done the same. Several of their Seattle friends had unfriended them, and the comments on their recent posts were brutal. People were questioning everything about their relationship, demanding explanations, and expressing disgust at how they'd treated me. I checked their accounts obsessively that evening, using the fake profiles I'd created months earlier. The few posts that were still visible showed clear signs of panic. Sarah had posted and deleted several messages, settling finally on a vague statement about difficult situations and learning from mistakes. David had posted nothing at all since my campaign began. The next morning brought even better news. Margaret Hoffman, Sarah's boss, had responded to my email, Dear Emma, thank you for bringing this situation to our attention. We are taking your concerns very seriously and will be conducting a review of Ms. Matthews' conduct. Our organization prides itself on integrity, and we cannot have staff members whose personal actions contradict our values. We will be in touch if we need additional information. David's HR department sent a similar response. We have received your concerns about Mr. Chen and are reviewing the matter. Thank you for providing detailed documentation. Over the following weeks, I watched their lives unravel with a satisfaction that felt almost intoxicating. Sarah was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into her conduct. The irony was perfect. She'd spent months lying to me about the most important relationship in my life while building her career on helping others with their problems. Her own dishonesty had finally caught up with her. David's partnership track was indefinitely postponed. His company's internal investigation concluded that while his personal conduct wasn't technically a fireable offense, it raised serious questions about his judgment and trustworthiness that made him unsuitable for a leadership position. Their friend group completely fragmented. Some people supported them, buying into their narrative that they'd fallen in love and couldn't help it. But many others were disgusted by the calculated nature of their deception and the way they'd treated me. The golden couple image they'd worked so hard to cultivate was permanently tarnished. Most satisfying of all was watching their family's reactions. Sarah's mother, who'd always treated me like a daughter, sent me a heartfelt apology email. Emma, dear, I am so sorry for what Sarah did to you. I raised her to be better than this, and I'm ashamed of her choices. You didn't deserve to be treated this way, especially by someone who claimed to love you. She also mentioned that she'd had a very difficult conversation with Sarah about her behavior, and that Sarah was facing consequences at home as well. David's parents were equally disappointing in their son. His father, who'd always prided himself on being a man of integrity, reportedly told David that he was ashamed to call him his son, and that he'd betrayed everything the family stood for. The professional consequences were swift and severe. Sarah lost her job within 2 weeks of my email campaign. The nonprofit's board decided that keeping her on staff would damage their reputation and contradict their mission. David managed to keep his job, but his career trajectory was permanently altered. The startup's CEO made it clear that David would never be considered for partnership and that his advancement opportunities were severely limited. But I wasn't done yet. 6 months after my initial campaign, I learned that Sarah and David were engaged. They'd had a small, private ceremony with just their immediate families, and Sarah had posted a single photo on Instagram with the caption, "Despite everything, love wins." The audacity of that post, framing their betrayal as a love story that had overcome obstacles, reignited my anger in a way I hadn't expected. They were still playing the victim, still acting like they'd been persecuted for falling in love rather than punished for systematic deception and betrayal. I decided it was time for phase 2 of my plan. I'd been monitoring their activities for months, and I knew they were planning to move back to our hometown. David had found a job with a marketing firm there, and Sarah was interviewing for positions with local nonprofits. They wanted a fresh start, away from the consequences of their actions in Seattle. I wasn't about to let them escape that easily. I reached out to every nonprofit organization, marketing firm, and professional network in our hometown. I created a comprehensive dossier about their conduct, complete with character references from people they'd worked with in Seattle and detailed accounts of their personal behavior. I made sure that every potential employer knew exactly who they were hiring. The job search that should have taken weeks stretched into months. Interview after interview ended with polite rejections. References weren't being called back. Professional networks that should have been helpful were suddenly unavailable. They were forced to take jobs well below their qualifications. Sarah ended up working as an administrative assistant at a small law firm, and David took a junior marketing position that paid less than half of what he'd been making in Seattle. Their engagement announcement in the local paper was met with knowing looks and whispered conversations among people who'd received my emails. But my masterstroke came a year after they'd moved back to town. I'd been tracking their activities through social media and local sources, and I learned that they were finally planning their dream wedding. After everything they'd been through, they wanted a big celebration to announce their love to the world. Sarah had been posting about dress shopping and venue tours, clearly desperate to reclaim some of the happiness and social acceptance they'd lost. I waited until they'd sent out save the dates before I made my move. I created a detailed website documenting their entire relationship timeline, complete with screenshots, photos, and testimonials from people who'd been affected by their deception. I called it The Real Love Story of Sarah and David, and included everything from Sarah's text messages encouraging me to trust David while she was sleeping with him, to photos of them together during the time period when they were both lying to me. Then I sent the link to everyone on their wedding invitation list. The website went viral within days. People were sharing it on social media, sending it to friends, and discussing it in local community groups. The story of the best friend and boyfriend who'd conducted a months-long affair while psychologically manipulating their victim became local legend. The wedding was canceled within a week. According to mutual acquaintances, half their guests had backed out after seeing the website. The venue had received so many angry calls that they'd offered to cancel the contract without penalty. Sarah's extended family was reportedly mortified by the public attention, and David's groomsmen had started dropping out one by one. The breaking point came when Sarah's maid of honor, her cousin Rachel, who'd been one of my closest friends growing up, called off her participation. Rachel sent me a private message. "Emma, I had no idea how bad it really was. I thought they'd just fallen in love and handled it poorly, but what you've documented is so much worse. I can't stand up there and celebrate this relationship knowing what they did to you. I'm sorry it took me this long to see the truth." That's when Sarah finally broke. I was at work on a Thursday afternoon when my receptionist buzzed me. "Emma, there's someone here to see you. She says her name is Sarah Matthews and that it's urgent." My heart started racing, but not with fear, with anticipation. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. After 3 years of watching Sarah and David escape consequences, minimize their actions, and play the victim, Sarah was finally coming to me. I told the receptionist to send her back to my office. Sarah looked terrible. She'd lost weight. Her hair was limp and unstyled, and she was wearing clothes that looked like she'd slept in them. The confident, radiant woman I'd seen in Seattle social media posts was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken and desperate. She stood in my doorway for a moment, and I could see her gathering courage to speak. Finally, she stepped into my office and closed the door behind her. "Emma, please, we need to talk." I leaned back in my chair and looked at her calmly. "Do we? You've destroyed our lives." Her voice was shaking. "You've made it impossible for us to work, to have friends, to get married, to exist in this town. When is enough enough?" "I haven't destroyed anything," I said evenly. "I've simply told people the truth about who you are and what you did. If that's destroyed your life, maybe you should think about what that says about your choices." "It was 3 years ago," she exploded. "When are you going to let it go?" "Let it go?" I felt a cold smile cross my face. "The way you let go of my boyfriend? The way you let go of our friendship when it became inconvenient for you?" Sarah's face crumpled, and she sank into the chair across from my desk. "Emma, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but we've paid for it. We've lost jobs, friends, family relationships. David's parents barely speak to him. My career is ruined. We can't even get married because of what you've done." "Because of what I've done?" I leaned forward. Sarah, let me be very clear about something. I didn't ruin your career. Your lying and manipulation did. I didn't destroy your friendships. Your betrayal did. I didn't cancel your wedding. Your own actions made it impossible for people to celebrate your relationship. But you're the one who told everyone. Yes, I told everyone the truth. The truth you spent months hiding. The truth you never would have told if I hadn't discovered it by accident. I stood up and walked around my desk to lean against it, looking down at her. Tell me, Sarah, what was your plan? Were you ever going to tell me the truth? Or were you just going to let me live in ignorance forever while you built your new life with my boyfriend? She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. We were going to tell you eventually. When? I don't know. We were trying to figure out how. You had 3 months to figure it out. 3 months of listening to me cry about missing David while you were sleeping with him. 3 months of me confiding in you about my fears while you were actively making them come true. You had every opportunity to be honest, and you chose deception every single time. We were scared. Of what? Of facing consequences for your actions? I walked back to my chair and sat down. Well, congratulations. You finally get to face them. Sarah looked up at me with desperate eyes. What do you want from us? What will it take for you to stop? This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Sarah Matthews, the girl who'd stolen my boyfriend and betrayed our 15-year friendship, was sitting in my office begging me to stop holding her accountable for her choices. I want you to understand something, I said quietly. For 3 months you made me feel crazy. You made me doubt my instincts, question my judgment, and blame myself for problems that weren't real. You watched me suffer and did nothing to ease that suffering because it was easier for you to let me live in pain than to face the consequences of what you were doing. Emma, I'm not finished. My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. You stole 3 months of my life. 3 months I could have spent healing and moving on, but instead spent in emotional agony because you were too selfish to tell me the truth. You made me feel like I was losing my mind when I sensed something was wrong. You gaslit me, manipulated me, and betrayed every promise you'd ever made about our friendship. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Are you? I asked. Are you sorry for what you did, or are you sorry that you're finally facing consequences for it? She was sobbing openly now. Both. I'm sorry for all of it. I never meant to hurt you so badly, but you did hurt me. I stood up again and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. You hurt me in ways I'm still recovering from 3 years later. You destroyed my ability to trust people. You made me question every friendship, every relationship, every person who claims to care about me. I know, and I hate myself for that. No, you don't. I turned back to face her. You hate that you're being held accountable for it. If you really hated what you'd done, you would have come clean on your own. You would have faced the consequences willingly instead of trying to hide from them. Sarah looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. What do you want me to do? How can I make this right? You can't. The words were simple but final. There's nothing you can do to make this right, Sarah. You can't undo 3 months of systematic betrayal. You can't give me back the time I lost or the trust I'll never fully recover. You can't fix the damage you did to my sense of security in relationships. Then why won't you stop? If I can't make it right, why do you keep punishing us? I walked back to my desk and looked down at her. Because actions have consequences. Because you made a choice to build your happiness on my suffering, and now you get to live with the results of that choice. Because you taught me that people will betray you without a second thought if it benefits them, so I learned to protect myself by making sure others know who you really are. We're not the same people we were 3 years ago, she said desperately. We've learned from our mistakes. We've grown. Have you? I tilted my head. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're still making the same choice you made 3 years ago. You're still prioritizing your own comfort over taking responsibility for your actions. You're still asking me to make sacrifices for your benefit. What do you mean? You want me to stop telling people the truth about you because it's making your life difficult. You want me to let you escape the consequences of your choices because you've decided you've suffered enough. You're asking me to prioritize your healing over mine, your future over my justice. I leaned forward. Sound familiar? Sarah's face went white as she realized what I was saying. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything for me, aren't you? You're asking me to give up the only thing that's helped me feel like I have any power in this situation. You're asking me to let you move on without fully facing what you did. You're asking me to prioritize your peace of mind over my right to tell my own story. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. For the first time since she'd walked into my office, she looked like she truly understood the magnitude of what she'd done. "I destroyed everything, didn't I?" she said quietly. "Yes," I said simply. "You did? Our friendship, your relationship with David, your ability to trust people." She was crying again, but quieter now. "I destroyed all of it because I was selfish and cowardly." "Yes, and now I'm doing it again. I'm coming here and asking you to protect me from the consequences of my own choices, instead of accepting that I deserve whatever happens to me." I nodded. "Now you're starting to understand." Sarah took a shaky breath. "What I did to you was unforgivable. Not just the affair, but the way I did it. The lying, the manipulation, the gaslighting, making you doubt yourself while I betrayed you every single day. Yes, and you have every right to tell people the truth about that. It's your story and you get to decide how to tell it." "That's right." She stood up slowly, and for the first time since she'd entered my office, she looked directly into my eyes. "I'm not going to ask you to stop anymore. I don't have the right to ask that." "No, you don't. I just want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I took from you, and I understand why you needed to take something back from me." She paused. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." I watched her walk toward the door, and for a moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a sense of completion. Sarah finally understood the scope of her betrayal and the justice of my response. She'd stopped minimizing her actions and making excuses. She'd stopped asking me to sacrifice my healing for her comfort. She was almost to the door when I spoke again. "Sarah." She turned back to me, and I could see in her eyes that she was genuinely listening for the first time in 3 years. "I hope you and David are happy together," I said. "I really do. Because what you did to get each other was so terrible that it would be a tragedy if it wasn't worth it." She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "Thank you for that. But understand this," I continued. "Your happiness doesn't erase what you did to me. Your love story doesn't justify the pain you caused. And your regret doesn't entitle you to forgiveness or a fresh start." "I know," she whispered. "Good. Then we understand each other." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, processing what had just happened. For 3 years, I'd been waiting for this moment, the moment when Sarah would truly understand what she'd done and stop trying to escape accountability for it. The moment when she'd acknowledge that my response was justified rather than trying to paint herself as the victim. It felt anticlimactic in some ways. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, satisfied. Instead, I felt oddly empty. The anger that had sustained me for 3 years was still there, but it felt different now. Less consuming, less urgent. I realized that my revenge had accomplished exactly what I'd hoped it would. Sarah and David had faced real consequences for their actions. Their friends, families, and professional networks knew who they really were. They'd lost the comfort of being able to rewrite history and pretend their relationship was a beautiful love story rather than a betrayal. Most importantly, they'd been forced to confront the truth about themselves. They couldn't hide behind justifications and excuses anymore. They couldn't pretend that what they'd done was understandable or forgivable. They had to live with the knowledge that they'd built their happiness on someone else's suffering, and that everyone in their lives knew it too. Over the following months, I gradually stopped monitoring their social media accounts and checking up on their activities. Not because I'd forgiven them, but because I no longer needed to. The anger that had driven me for 3 years had finally found its target and accomplished its purpose. I'd gotten justice, not in the form of an apology or an admission of guilt, but in the form of consequences that matched the severity of their actions. Sarah and David did eventually get married, but it was a small courthouse ceremony with only their immediate families present. They moved to a different state for a fresh start, but the internet is forever, and their story followed them. Every job application, every attempt to join professional networks, every effort to build new social connections was complicated by the fact that a simple Google search revealed the truth about how their relationship began. They learned what I'd learned 3 years earlier, that betrayal has a way of reshaping your entire life. The difference was that their consequences were self-inflicted, while mine had been forced on me by people I trusted. I never spoke to either of them again after that day in my office. There was nothing left to say. They'd finally understood what they'd done, accepted responsibility for it, and stopped asking me to minimize my response. That was enough. As for me, I eventually healed. It took years of therapy and conscious effort to rebuild my ability to trust people, but I did it. I learned to form new relationships without constantly waiting for betrayal. I found love again with someone who understood my history and helped me believe that not everyone would hurt me the way Sarah and David had. The anger never completely went away, but it transformed into something useful. It became a compass that helped me recognize toxic behavior and protect myself from people who might try to manipulate or deceive me. It became a source of strength that reminded me I deserved better than people who would betray my trust for their own benefit. Most importantly, it taught me that justice and healing aren't always the same thing, but sometimes you need justice before you can heal. Sometimes you need to see consequences for terrible behavior before you can let go of the pain it caused. Sometimes revenge isn't about being petty or vindictive. It's about restoring balance to a world that feels fundamentally unfair. Sarah was right about one thing in our final conversation. I had destroyed their lives in a sense. But I'd done it the same way they'd destroyed mine, by telling the truth about who they really were and letting the consequences fall where they belonged. The only difference was that when they destroyed my life, they did it in secret and then asked me to help them hide their actions. When I destroyed theirs, I did it in public and made sure everyone knew exactly why. They'd taught me that people you love and trust can betray you without hesitation if it serves their interests. So I'd taught them that betrayal has a price, and sometimes that price takes years to collect. It was a harsh lesson, but it was one they'd earned through their own choices. In the end, that's what revenge really is. Not some grand gesture of vindication, but simply the insistence that actions have consequences and that those consequences shouldn't fall only on the victim. It's the refusal to absorb someone else's cruelty without making them face the cost of what they've done. Sarah and David got their love story. They got each other, just like they'd wanted. But they also got the truth about what that love story had cost, and they got to live with that truth for the rest of their lives. They got to explain to their children someday why mommy and daddy don't have any friends from college, why grandma and grandpa are disappointed in them, why their wedding photos don't include extended family or close friends. They got their happy ending, but they also got their reckoning. And in my book, that's exactly what they deserved. The dish was served cold, just like they say, and it was every bit as satisfying as I'd hoped it would be.